content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. John Mintz does not provide tax or legal advice. All decisions regarding the tax or legal implications of your investments should be made in connection with your independent tax or legal advisor.
Have you ever wondered why the rich get richer and others don't? Could it be that a small percentage of the population pay others to find, study, and execute on legal loopholes that exist with our financial life and make it easier for them to prosper? The answer is a resounding yes. This is the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. John has spent a lifetime researching and mastering the financial loopholes that he believes should be available to everyone. Join us as we explore different strategies that help you get farther faster towards building and enjoying a prosperous retirement.
Hello and welcome to the Secrets of the Wealthy with John Mintz. John, how are you?
Hey, Eric. I'm fantastic. I'm really looking forward to today's show. I was just speaking with my wife, Leah, last night, who's also my best friend, and we were just saying what a privilege it is to be in the position that we're in, to be able to make a positive impact in the lives of others. And I was thinking as I was coming on here today, thinking, man, if I could just make a positive difference in one individual or one couple or one family through these shows, then I've done my job. You know what I mean? So I'm just really excited about today.
Well, you can tell your wife that you have made a positive impact. I've already learned things from you. And I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of this show and be here with you. And I know today is actually going to be part one of a two-part small mini-series here about a perfect storm, correct?
That's right. You got it.
Okay, so what is the perfect storm? What are we talking about?
Well, the perfect storm is a play on words. We're specifically talking about a financial perfect storm, or for some folks, it might be a retirement perfect storm. Mm-hmm. And I believe that there are two really powerful financial factors that are merging together that could absolutely sink people's retirement. And we'll talk about what those two things are here in a minute. But the best way to help people visualize this is, I'm here in Mansfield, Texas today, and we had some storms here last night, as we get here often. Mm-hmm. Anytime storms come in like this, people worry that they could be developed into, possible tornadoes. And what happens, right, is the warm air merges with the cold air, and it causes rotation and causes a very destructive storm out in the, if you live on the coast, like a lot of folks do, and that may be listening to this, and if you have cold water merge with warm water, it creates a whole different storm, but both of them equally destructive. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I'm referencing here, is we have two forces that are merging together that could cause a really destructive force on people's retirement. And so we're here to talk about that today, but more importantly, here to talk about what maybe can be done about it too.
Okay, so what are those two forces, John?
Well, the first of those two is what I like to refer to as the expanding stock market bubble. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say that, I don't know how to get through to some folks on this one, because, sometimes I start to talk to folks about this and they just have this belief that the markets are going to just keep going and going and going, and they're never, they just don't have any end to it. And the reality is it just really doesn't work that way. So what happens over time is that, these bubbles form. And, and eventually bubbles do break. Mm-hmm. And when they break, it can be really, really damaging in many ways. And I do want to give credit to a couple of groups today. I have what I refer to as my extended team, and they are Retirement Architecture and Stonewood Financial, and that's where some of these facts and figures you're going to hear today. But getting back to the stock market bubble, let's talk about that for just a minute. So in December of 2010, right, 10 years ago, the Dow Jones sat at 11,577. All right. That was the Dow Jones in December of 2010. In December of 2020, only 10 years later, the Dow Jones was 30,606. Now, of course, it's higher now. But if you were to extract that on a percentage increase, that's a 10-year increase of 264%. Now, that's 2.5 times growth in only 10 years. Now, I don't care what you believe. That is a bubble, and that's a fact. And I'm going to talk about here in a minute how I know it's a bubble, because I like to, everything that I teach, folks, I like to back it up with math or facts, because I tell folks, you may or may not believe everything I say, but you will believe the math, because math is perfect, right? And so that is, that is a problem, that is a bubble, and it's one that we need to be aware of. And there's ways that we can know that. And one of those ways is something called the Shiller PE ratio. So have you ever heard of Robert Shiller before, Eric?
I have not.
Okay. Well, Robert Shiller is he's a pretty amazing guy. He's a world-renowned American economist who developed this chart, if you will. And he's been named as one of Bloomberg's 50 most influential people in global finance, and he's nominated for a Nobel Prize in economics, for his study in market volatility and asset prices and those things. If I say it in another way, he's a really smart dude. Okay, so
I feel bad that I don't know him.
yeah. Well, he's an incredible man, but I find him fascinating because he created this, and you can look this up. It's called the Shiller, Schiller PE ratio, price per earnings ratio. And so the S&P 500 is the 500 largest U.S. publicly traded companies, right? And the PE ratio is the stock price divided by the average of 10 years of earnings. So when I checked this recently, this PE ratio, all right, on his chart, it was 35.62, meaning it's over 30. Now, that doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it will in a minute, all right? So if you go all the way back on the S&P 500 index chart, if you go all the way back to the late 1800s to find how many times has this ratio exceeded 30 points, and it's happened 3 times in over 40 years. 3 times. So one of those is now, right now. The previous one before that was in 2000. All right? And there's this, if you're looking at the chart with me, you'd seen this massive run up from early 80s to 2000, only to get hammered back down, right? From the double crash, the one in 2000 and another one in 2008.
Yep.
So that was the last time it had exceeded 30. Then you have to go all the way back to Black Tuesday, which was the beginning of the Great Depression. And you remember the Roaring 20s, right? That decade, there's a reason why they call it the Roaring 20s, because people were living high on the hog, and they were just loving life and just thought that, there was no end to their greatness, right? And so in all 3 of these cases, one thing is similar, that we kind of just threw logic aside and we kept buying stocks in spite of it all, and in spite of what the facts are telling us. So what I am telling you is I don't know what's going to happen, but what I also am telling you is I know what happened the last 2 times this happened. Yeah. And that if we're not paying attention, we could get caught in a really bad spot for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's one of those things where the writing's on the wall. People need to take caution, but I think a lot of people just prefer to keep the rose-colored glasses on or the blinders on, right?
Well, of course they do. I mean, we want to think optimistic, right? Thinking negative doesn't help anything. It doesn't help anything get better. That's for sure. But if we think optimistic, that's okay. But if we're thinking optimistic and not using logic, yeah, it's going to get us in trouble, right? So I do think that. But I said I would prove everything, right, with facts. So let's just talk just for a second about the last two recent crashes.
Okay.
Now, if you go back to 2000, right, in the beginning of that crash, that was a pretty significant crash, 2000, 2001, 2002. The markets dropped 47.5% over that 3-year period.
Yeah.
Almost 50%, right? But more importantly was that it took you, forever. You had to scratch and claw and just, it seemed like forever to get back to even. And to be exact, that forever was 7 years and 1 month. So people finally got back to even, and they got this slight, optimism again and euphoria, only to get knocked down faster and harder and get their teeth kicked in again, not even a year later, until 2008. And that one knocked us down 53.4%. And that one took another 5 years and 5 months to get back to even.
Yeah.
So if we just stop and think about that for a minute, right? It took 12 and a half years from the beginning of the first one to the ending of the second one just to break even. Now, if you started your retirement at the beginning of that 12-year period, and I was around, talking to people through this during that time, and unfortunately, a lot of folks that retired within 2 or 3 years were coming out of retirement and going back to work. I don't know if you remember that, but it was not a lot of fun for a lot of people. And so most folks don't have 12 years to wait. If they're 65 or 70 and retiring, they don't have 12 years to wait for their money to come back, especially and that doesn't take into account if we're taking distributions and withdrawals on a retirement during that period of time. Yeah, it's making it even worse, right?
Yeah.
So that's the last two crashes we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Again, I appreciate the facts. Keep them coming. Because we need to make educated decisions, right?
Yeah, we do. And, it's the other thing I teach people is that they understand why it is so hard to get back to even when we lose in our accounts, but they don't understand why it's so hard. Okay. And so there's this mathematical algorithm, and I'm going to try to make this as easy as it is to understand, but sometimes we call this the dark side of compound interest. There's Einstein's who said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, right? But he was talking about the positive side of compound interest. But there's something that I call the dark side of compound interest, which is an algorithm that says, okay, if I lose X percent, what percent do I have to gain Y to get back to even? And a lot of folks think, well, if you lose 10%, you got to gain 10 to get back to even. That's not true. If we lose 10, we have to gain 11% to get back to even. If we lose 20, the situation just worsens. We got to gain 25 to get back to even. A 30% loss takes 43% to break even. A 40% loss takes 67, and then a 50% loss, which we had not one but two of those in that lost decade, as they refer to it as, it takes 100% just to get back to even. Yeah. So, I ask folks comically, I say, hey, how many of you guys were around in the class? I say, how many of you guys were around in 2000 and 2008? Well, obviously we were all here. And so I say, now you know how hard it was to get back to even, but now you know why it's so hard to get back to even, mathematically. And that just kind of brings it into full circle that there's no way that the markets just can go on forever. There is an end to everything, and we need to be prepared for it.
Well, I mean, again, just using facts, the market has never just gone on up forever, right? There's always been something that's corrected it, if you will, or popped, as far as the bubble throughout the years. So history tells us that it has happened every time. That's a pretty good standard for why it'll continue. Now, that's the stock market side of things. What is the second perfect storm that you're talking about?
Yes. And so the second piece of fuel, if you will, or the second force that's going to merge together with the one that we just mentioned, is one that's getting a lot of attention right now. And that's this ever increasing U.S. national debt. Now, we've briefly mentioned that on a previous show, but I'm going to dig in a little deeper today, and because I believe this is one that nobody can deny. And it's one that is a mathematical certainty that's going to cause us some issues. But if we just talk about what the national debt is today, and it's, I have to check hourly because it's increasing so fast. But last time I checked, it was approaching 28.2 trillion. And again, like we said before, that does not include the additional 1.9 that just got approved, and the additional 2 million over that's going out as well. And so that's an increase just since 2000 of $23 trillion. And the Congressional Budget Office, who is forecast what our future budget and our future deficit will be, has recommended or forecast that our deficit is going to be 31 trillion in 2030. That's obviously not going to be the case. We're going to get there this year. And so I don't know if that number is going to be 40 or 50 trillion. I don't know. At the rate we're going, it's probably going to be 50. I've been saying 40, but I'm about to revise my estimate as well. So we said all that before, but here's the bigger thing here that I want to talk about, which is people understanding. I want people to understand how big that number is. When we talk about 30 trillion, I want people to really, really know that's a huge, huge number. And Rand Paul recently discussed this in his address to Congress, and he talks about it, and I'm just going to go through it briefly, but, a billion seconds ago, Reagan was president, and a billion hours ago, man lived in caves. But in U.S. debt, he says, when was $1 billion ago? Just 80 minutes. 80 minutes. So the debt is growing by 80 minutes. $1 billion every 80 minutes. That's the problem that we have here.
Yeah, that's my brain hurts. It's right? So hard to understand what a trillion truly is. It boggles the mind.
Well, yeah, I still trying to wrap my brain around it, and I've looked for many different ways to try to help people understand it, try to help myself understand it. This how big is a trillion? If you Google how big is a trillion, you can tell I Google a lot. But if you Google how big is a trillion, there you can find at least 50, maybe 100 different illustrations, actual picture illustrations to help people understand how big is a trillion. Now, if you can Google that and find that many different illustrations, that means that there's a lot of people talking about it, right? So that's what I mean by, that this is getting a lot of attention now. In the media, it's getting a lot of attention online, and rightfully so. But how big is a trillion? I'll give you some examples. So a trillion is 1,000 billions, or 1 million millions. So said another way, 1 trillion seconds is 31,576 years.
What? That?
Yeah. Okay.
I've never heard it put that way, and that's crazy. 31,000 years.
It is. I had to check it. I had to check it like 3 or 4 times to make sure it was accurate. And the $1 trillion, if you took $100 bill, okay, not $1 bills, $100 bills, and stacked them up on top of each other, a trillion would be 2.5 times as high as the International Space Station.
Jeez.
Now, the International Space Station is 248 miles high. So, these aren't $1 bills. These are $100 bills that we're stacking up. And so now, those illustrations I'm using, Eric, that's 1 trillion.
Yeah.
Okay. Our deficit is 30 trillion. 30 of those. So we're into another universe now, I guess.
Yeah,
we're stacking them up.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking, when you're talking those seconds, you're almost at 1 million years with our national debt. 1 million years.
Yeah, exactly. It's horrible. So I mentioned also, I think on a previous show, I mentioned how people can go to a site called us.clot.org, which really does a good job of communicating and defining our national deficit in a lot of different ways. But I wanted to talk about that for a second again today because, here we are, we sit with this deficit that we have. And if we think of our country as a business, because it is, right? If we think of our government as a business, if we think of our households as a business, because see, I define a business as anything that has money coming in and going out. And everything I just said is that way, including a household, right? And so if you can either say, I want my household or my business to be profitable or not, right? And we have a lot of households that aren't profitable.
Yeah.
We have other households that are very profitable. It's why I sometimes see teachers have more money saved up at retirement than doctors or dentists, because they run it they run their house like a business. And so that being said, if we talk about our government for a minute and our households, if we had, let's just say that we talk about a family and a household for a minute. Let's just say that, we had run up some credit card debt, a significant amount of credit card debt. And then we say, oh, don't worry about it. That payment coming due on that credit card, we'll just go get another credit card over here, and we'll take money out on that credit card to make the payments on the other credit cards. And then when that one comes due, we'll get another credit card. Well, what do you think is the end of that story?
Jail?
I think they call it, jail. Yeah, either jail. I've never used that one before. That's great. Either jail. The one I usually use is bankruptcy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But jail's probably even better. But that's the end of the story. So why is it that we all logically know that's bad for our households, but is it not bad for our government also? I mean, how is it not bad for our government? That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so at some point in time, somebody is going to have to pay for this. Right? And so that's why I say that tax increases are an absolute mathematical certainty.
Yeah. Uncle Sam is going to come knocking, period. One way or another.
Yep. It's coming. Absolutely.
All right. So, I mean, you've kind of labeled the beasts, the storms. What else do we need to know on this podcast? I know that the second podcast, you're really going to focus on, some of the things that we can do to fix our own situations and some of the things that, maybe light at the end of the tunnel. But what do we need to cover in the rest of this one today?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to talk about is, I don't think I've mentioned this previously, but there's something called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Back in 2018 came about. And there's something attached to that called a sunset provision, meaning that at the end of 2025, that act will no longer be in existence, and we will then revert back to our previous tax rates prior to 2018. So, we had this reduction. So they lowered our taxes. Oh, by the way, at the same time, took deductions away from us. Okay. Now our taxes are going to go back up. Eric, you think they're going to give those deductions back to us?
Yeah, no.
Of course. Well, of course not. They never do.
Yeah.
And so here we sit. We're going to have less deductions and higher taxes. Now, we know that for a fact at the end of 2025. Now, I know there's a lot of talk now about that happening sooner than that and happening larger than that. But I say we only can control what we know is going to happen, right? So that being said, if we all agree that taxes are headed north, that's a fact. So what, if anything, can be done about it? Well, the first thing is we need to talk about what could happen if nothing is done about it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, and I talk about this in class, is that the potential expense of not properly planning for these things can be, hugely detrimental. And, I have folks in class, and I'll start talking about taxes, and I'll start talking about, their 401ks and their IRAs, how taxes have never been paid. And I almost always have somebody say, well, I don't have to pay taxes on my 401k, right? And people actually believe this. Yeah. And I don't know how it's happened. I really don't know how it's happened, but I guess they thought the word tax deferred meant tax free.
Yeah, so, maybe.
I don't know, but it just baffles my mind every time I hear it. But the facts are that 70% of seniors know little to nothing about the tax implications on their retirement accounts, or how that's going to impact them when money starts getting forced out. And something we talked about in a previous show, which is RMDs, which stands for required minimum distributions. And to cover that again, this is where the government is going to force money out of your retirement accounts. Force, okay? I used the correct word there. Mm-hmm. Whether you want them to or not, beginning at the age of 72. So, like I say, you can either have the government's plan or you can have your own plan, right? But you're going to have a plan one way or the other. And so on the next episode, that's what we're going to be talking about, Eric, is we're going to talk about, all right, now we know it's obvious we do have a problem. I don't think we'll get any argument that, but what can we start to do to start changing our thought process and start thinking about this problem and finding a solution to this problem, right?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, this was a great overview of kind of the problems we're facing, and I'm really looking forward to the next podcast, right? Because I'd like to hear some positive things that we can do. So, John, this has been fantastic. Any closing thoughts for today?
Well, yeah, in an effort to hopefully have somebody come back for the next one, I hopefully it wasn't Debbie Downer today and made everybody feel so horrible that they don't want to come back to the show. Please come back and listen to our next show, because you're going to be enlightened and you're going to be uplifted and you're definitely going to be encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what John is really good at. But if between now and then you're like, you know what, I'd like to talk about that now. I know that John would be more than happy to meet with you. So, John, how do they reach out to you if they want to get answers quicker?
Oh, absolutely. And, we always welcome anyone to call us. Our direct number is 817-225-6260, or they can go to our brand new website that was literally just released yesterday, and that is at biltmore-financial.com, biltmore-financial.com.
Perfect. John, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you too, Eric. Look forward to the next one.
Absolutely. And our last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when John comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks so much for listening today. For everyone at the Secrets of the Wealthy, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Secrets of the Wealthy podcast with John Mintz. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of John Mintz. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.